We are resumed. We are resumed. Okay. You want to loan one of my hearing aids? Just in case. For our next panel, we will be hearing from Naeem Merchant, Executive Director of Carbon Removal Canada, who is joining us by video link, and Diane Hoskins, Global Policy Director, Carbon Sea Initiative. On behalf of the members of the committee, I thank you both for joining us here this evening, and I understand that both of you have opening remarks. So I'm going to go to our virtual guest first. Mr. Merchant, you have the floor.
Good evening, Chair and Honourable Senators. Thank you for inviting me back to discuss ocean carbon removal and Canada's opportunity in this emerging field. Carbon Removal Canada is an independent nonprofit accelerating the responsible scale-up of carbon removal technologies. We advocate for impactful policies grounded in rigorous research, shape Canada's emerging carbon removal market, and connect the right people to the right information. We are entirely philanthropically funded and don't accept industry money. This independence lets us be an honest information broker, working with governments across Canada. For senators new to this topic, let me clarify the landscape. Permanent carbon removal takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and stores it for thousands of years. These technologies address emissions already accumulating since the Industrial Revolution, the ones fueling the wildfires and ocean acidification we see around us. Think of the atmosphere as a bathtub, rapidly filling with water. Carbon capture at industrial facilities is turning off the faucet, preventing new emissions. Carbon removal is pulling the plug and draining what's already there. Both are necessary, neither alone is sufficient. This differs from short-term approaches like tree planting, which store carbon for less than 100 years on average. Those methods have their place, but not at the scale required to address the climate crisis we face. When I last spoke to this committee, I said ocean carbon removal represents an opportunity we cannot waste, a chance for Canada to provide climate leadership, differentiate itself globally, and create tens of thousands of jobs. None of that has changed. What has changed is the urgency. In recent months, you've seen news about US companies relocating their carbon removal projects to Canada. Consider what this means. Amid tariffs and geopolitical tensions, while automakers shutter Canadian operations and shift production south, this sector is moving in the opposite direction. Companies are choosing Canada despite the headwinds. Why? They see what I see. Canada has world-class expertise, supportive communities, and the intellectual property that launched this field. Despite these advantages, Canada stands at a crossroads. Companies considering locating here identify three consistent barriers. First, business certainty. There's a fundamental mismatch between government mandates lasting 4 years and companies making 10-year investment decisions. In ocean carbon removal, multiple federal departments all have a hand on the wheel before you even reach provincial jurisdictions. Companies tell me they lack clear direction about who makes decisions, what approvals they need, and how long processes will take. 2, innovation pathways. We have extraordinary talent. Some of the world's finest minds in ocean carbon removal want to work here, contribute to our economy, and help solve our climate problems. The question is how we support not just today's projects, but the next generation of technologies. How do we answer the pressing questions that the government and communities rightfully have? And third, trust and partnership. Every sector must build social license, but carbon removal must earn it daily. Communities need to feel safe and heard, even when they don't grasp every scientific detail. Indigenous partnership and participation is also critical, not as an afterthought, but from day one, as witnesses have shared with you. This committee can help ensure Canada doesn't lose its lead. I recommend 2 immediate actions. First, establish a federally led research roadmap. We've heard repeated calls for more research before proceeding, but there's rarely clarity about what more actually means. Which specific topics need investigation? What studies would answer outstanding questions? What are the ultimate goalposts? This vagueness creates perpetual delay. The federal government should take an active role by deploying its own researchers and funding in partnership with academia and industry. We need specific milestones, defined timelines, and clear success criteria, not open-ended investigation. Second, expand carbon removal procurement. The federal government has started down this path with a low carbon fuel procurement program. Working with the Treasury Board Secretariat, we secured an initial $10 million carbon removal purchase commitment. These credits will decarbonize emissions from our national safety and security fleet. We should build on this foundation. Canada's NATO commitments, which explicitly include domestic investments, present the perfect vehicle to expand procurement and support Canadian companies while meeting both our defense and climate responsibilities. Every procurement dollar creates business certainty, validates Canadian innovation, and keeps companies from relocating to jurisdictions with clear market signals. The window to lead is closing. Other nations are watching Canada's hesitation and moving to capture the economic benefits of technologies that we helped pioneer. Some of the brightest minds in this field want to build their futures here. Companies are actively seeking to relocate to Canada right now. The choice is straightforward. Act decisively to lead, or watch from the sidelines as others profit from a transition we began. I urge this committee to recommend immediate action on research coordination and procurement expansion. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Merchant. Ms. Hoskins, you have the floor.
Good evening, Chairman Manning, Deputy Chairman Busan, and members of the committee. My name is Diane Hoskins, and I'm the Global Policy Director at Carbon to Sea Initiative. We're the largest non-commercial initiative evaluating if and how ocean-based carbon dioxide removal could be a part of the global response to climate change. I'll refer to it as oCDR today. I've spent my career at the intersection of climate change, ocean conservation, and policy. So getting this right for our ocean environment and our climate is at the heart of what drives me every day. At Carbon to Sea, we work closely with academic institutions, the private sector, civil society, and First Nations to fund scientific efforts aimed at assessing potential of one particular oCDR approach, ocean alkalinity enhancement, which is referred to as OAE. To date, we've spent or committed just under $60 million for research and development initiatives with a substantial concentration with Nova Scotia-based partners. OAE is a carbon dioxide removal approach that has extremely high potential according to leading scientists. Effectively, over long periods of time, as rocks are exposed to elements, their minerals are naturally washed into the ocean. That helps balance out the acidic effect of carbon dioxide in the water. Adding more of these minerals could speed up the natural process, allowing ocean waters to soak up more carbon dioxide without becoming more acidic. Carbon to Sea's research program and grant-making centers on rigorously answering three questions. Can we replicate that process safely for people and the environment? Is OAE effective at removing legacy carbon from the atmosphere? And can it scale to a climate-relevant solution? We're outcome agnostic when it comes to those questions. And so if the research shows that for a particular OAE approach that it's not effective, not safe, or scalable, we would consider this a success because it would free us up to explore and advance more promising ocean climate solutions. We have a significant presence in Canada through our grantees, primarily in Halifax, and our work here is led by my colleague Miriam Zittner, who is here with us today. My written testimony explains why Carbon to Sea focuses on OAE, drills down into the details of why OAE has so much potential, and gives an overview of how the United States has advanced oCDR research over the last several years. I hope it's a useful resource, but in this setting, I'd like to emphasize three key points. First, carbon removal is a necessary complement to aggressive emissions reductions. Carbon to Sea focuses on OAE because major scientific bodies, including the IPCC, have concluded that deep emissions cuts alone will not be enough to prevent the worst effects of climate change and meet our climate goals. The world must also remove carbon at a gigaton scale this century, which is no small feat. Governments have a unique role to play in shaping oCDR. Today, private and philanthropic investments are driving most ocean-based carbon removal research, but evaluating oCDR is a public interest endeavor at its core. Governments have a critical role to play in steering responsible research, setting clear rules, and ensuring the field develops with transparency, safety, and public good in mind. That is especially true in the ocean, a shared global resource where public trust and stewardship is paramount. Third, Canada can lead by supporting research, development, and demonstration. Through its greening government strategy and the Treasury Board's plan to procure carbon removal services, Canada is already showing foresight and adopting a forward-looking posture on climate. With the longest coastline in the world, globally recognized academic institutions, and a robust ocean-based economy, Canada has a huge opportunity to deepen its leadership by focusing on advancing responsible research and development of ocean-based climate solutions. That means dedicating public funding to support OAE research and development efforts, ensuring the Treasury Board's upcoming RFP advances eligibility for ocean-based approaches deemed appropriate, establishing specific carbon removal targets, and expanding investment tax credits to incentivize private sector investments. Let me conclude by emphasizing Canada's opportunity right now. It's widely expected that carbon removal, and ocean-based carbon removal specifically, will be a major industry by mid-century. But how the industry develops will be determined right now and how governments engage at this stage. Now's the time to be involved. If Canada steps forward by investing in research and clarifying regulations, it can help set the global standard for responsible oCDR while protecting its coasts, creating potentially thousands of jobs, and contributing to the global effort against climate change. So thank you for inviting me to testify, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Hoskins. And our first questions will come from our Deputy Chair, Senator Busson.
Thank you very much. And without being glib about the whole matter, it lends me to ask the question, what color is the sky on your planet? Because the person we heard from before and the testimony that you're giving us are like night and day as far as the ability to hope for a clear future and the possibility of oCDR or MCDR. And I'm wondering if you could, either one of you, maybe attempt to reconcile how the precautionary policy approach of DFO, using words like slow down, be careful, regulate, reconciles with the conversations that you bring to us that are framed with words like innovative pathways and positive results in I think you said 50 years or 30 years or whatever, like positive results within a lifetime. And I'm wondering if I could get both of you to comment on that observation of mine, whether I'm right, and what we can do about it. We could start perhaps with you, Diane, if you would.
Sure. Dr. Gurney Smith mentioned a focus on, a big focus on efficacy, and emphasized that there was more work needed on environmental safety. On that, we agree. And so that's what Carbon to Sea is doing in terms of making investments around these key questions that we have. Is it safe? Is it effective? And can it scale? And approaching those in a stepwise ways fashion is prudent. Another consideration to put into the conversation is how should and can we be thinking about the precautionary principle? This is something that environmentalists think a lot about. It's near and dear to our hearts. But the truth is that unmitigated climate change is the greatest threat to our ocean health and ecosystems. In-water field trials and research are required to fill the gaps in our knowledge that, as the previous witness mentioned, and on that we agree. And while some research could propose some risks, we believe that they can be managed through appropriate regulation and oversight by competent regulators, and that's why it's so prudent that government get involved at this stage and learn alongside the investments by private sector and philanthropy.
Mr. Merchant, would you like to add?
Yeah, Mr. Merchant.
Thank you, Senator. It's a good question, and I think that we We also, agree with Dr. Gurney Smith about the importance of taking, important consideration of ecological impacts and potential ecological impacts. I think where we may differ slightly is that we see, the research and demonstration efforts need to be done in a parallel multi-stakeholder fashion, that we can't focus only on biological impacts before we get to studying societal issues, or before we begin bring in stakeholders like fisheries into the conversation, or decide to validate commercial viability. We believe these things can happen in parallel. We advocate for a research agenda that brings diverse stakeholders together to work different aspects of the problem in a coordinated approach. An approach that benefits from a learning by doing methodology, and that brings different stakeholders to the table at the outset, and allows us to then lead and set the standard for what responsible marine carbon removal looks like, defined here in Canada as opposed to elsewhere, where they are trying to advance research in this area as well.
If I might, Mr. Chair, just a very quick question, and I kind of alluded to it in my first part of my question. Clearly, and you've brought it up, the government's a huge player in this. What can we do to accelerate either the possibility or encourage the energy of government officials? And I don't mean to criticize Ms. Gurney Smith, that she's clearly well focused on her job. But what can we do as a committee to help you perhaps turn the page or accelerate the naysaying tendencies of people like DFO? Do you have any ideas or suggestions of how we might approach that?
Well, I think one way to do that is that we bring together, different departments and different experts and industry representatives and community leaders to discuss the challenge and work this problem together. I think that if we attempt to address these issues in a silo, we won't make the progress that we need. I think DFO brings some important concerns to the table that need to be taken very seriously, and I think that there's an important need to consider and consult, proximal communities like Fisheries, for example, different industry groups. I just think that there's a way to advance the conversation by bringing together different stakeholders and having a multi-stakeholder approach to determining, what questions need to be answered and how we can advance the field.
Ms. Hopkins?
Sure. One example to share from the U.S. context would be last year the White House put together a fast-track action committee on ocean-based carbon dioxide removal, and it was an all-of-government approach to bring together all of the agencies across the U.S. government who had equities in ocean-based carbon removal to surface equities, concerns, opportunities across government. And as a result, it was the multi-stakeholder process that Naeem alluded to, and I think was able to get folks coordinating faster than they otherwise would have been able to with the day-to-day responsibilities of their individual mandates.
Could I just quickly ask, is oCDR and MCDR the same thing?
Yes. Yes.
You finished, Senator Rosen? Okay. I thought you were taking a chapter of Senator Deacon's book there. Senator Deacon, you're next.
Thank you so much, Chair. I appreciate it. Really appreciate the opening statements from Mr. Merchant and Ms. Hoskins. Actually, I want to just build off of, and if both of you could to address this, and maybe you could start with it, Ms. Hoskins, is there's been a change in direction in the United States since the event you described of regulators being pulled together for a fast tracking. And there are changes around the world right now where Canada, I think, does have an opportunity to lead. We have. I'd love you to speak about the quality of the science available in Canada, the expertise and the speed and the number of academic scientists that seem to be studying this space in Canada. If you could, just from your perspective, because you've been attracted here as a U.S.-based entity to work in Canada, so that's one of the things that I have a sense has attracted you. And then just speak about how you see Canada's position having changed in the last year, and perhaps both of you could just look at that a little bit. Thank you.
Sure. Carbon to Sea is a global entity, so we think about the world at large. I will say that Canada certainly has been a major focal point, as I mentioned. A large proportion of our initial grant making has centered around the Nova Scotia area. Researchers at Dalhousie University and their partnership with Planetary Technologies has been an incredible testbed for the field and trialing ocean alkalinity enhancement research in the Bedford Basin. As a result, we're able to learn much faster. Notably, the ocean is an incredibly difficult place to conduct research. And going from a lab to benchtop to in the water can be really, really tough. And technology development, going from research, development, demonstration, small scale, it's typically supported by both public sector dollars, government, as well as philanthropy. But public funding has been quite scarce for MCDR. And that has made private sector financing even more critical at these early stages of development. And Planetary's investment in Nova Scotia has given the researchers at Dalhousie University something to research. And that's been a critical part of driving the research and progress that we're learning from.
In terms of the U.S. federal government involvement in this space now, it seems to have changed quite a bit in the last year, and particularly around research and regulation.
There's been some shifts in U.S. policy, no doubt, but I think that the lessons from the last year can offer insight to Canada on how Canada can rapidly advance progress. And my hope is that there's opportunities for future collaboration amongst our governments and academic research institutions as well.
Too. Mr. Merchant?
Yes, thank you, Senator Deakin, for the question. I agree with everything Diane just said, but I'll just add that, I think in the context of Canada, while we have seen some policy shifts in the United States, there's a need to move quicker in Canada to embrace this window of opportunity in front of us. We have companies like Planetary, like Carbon Run and others, and great world-class researchers at Dalhousie and elsewhere that are eager to move the ball forward in this field, and they are doing excellent work. They're truly leading the world in their respective fields, and what we need is for supportive policy around ocean carbon removal to keep up with it, and in fact help chart a path forward that helps stimulate even more innovation and even more research. So my concern is that from the policy standpoint, we're not keeping up with our innovators, and that might mean that we are not able to embrace the opportunity that exists where we've seen a less favorable policy environment in the United States that could attract more research, more innovation, more jobs here in Canada, and create an opportunity for Canada to define what responsible ocean carbon removal really looks like. That's what leadership can bring from an ecological standpoint, from a measurement, reporting, and verification standpoint, from an economic standpoint. There's just an amazing opportunity here, and we would like to see, despite I think the early progress that I've mentioned earlier in my opening remarks, we need to build on this and we need to do it faster.
Thank you very much. Round two.
Thank you, Senator Deakin. Senator Boudreau.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for Mr. Merchant, and I would like to ask my question in French this time, if that's fine. In your remarks, you mentioned that you were pleased with the fact that communities support this new sector of ocean carbon sequestration, and you talked about having social license for this new technology. However, if you listen to the remarks during the first panel, while I was asking questions to the scientific researcher from Fisheries and Oceans, she confirmed for us that there was no consultation whatsoever with businesses, with our fishers, for instance, and with our industries in the fishery industry. I think you yourself also mentioned that there has not yet been proper and due consultation. Therefore, how is it that you are saying to us that we have social license and the support of communities when those individuals who make a living on the water, on the ocean, haven't yet been consulted? Can you tell us who has spoken to whom to date? Could you please comment on that? I would be very curious to know. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question and for the opportunity to clarify. We have been impressed by the activities of companies like Planetary, Carbon Run, as well as researchers working at Dalhousie University in engaging communities involved in the projects that they're working on. They have, in the context of working in Canada, done a good job of community engagement, and there's always more that can be done. We can always improve on that, but I think they've set they have started off well in that respect, and that they have been pursuing their work with a very intentional community engagement strategy. And so I think it's important that we give these companies and these researchers the credit that they're due for the community engagement they've done to date. Does that mean that we have engaged, every potential community or every Indigenous nation or every, economic group that would be affected by marine carbon removal? Absolutely not. There's so much work to be done there. I think, though, that from relatively speaking, for an emerging technology, for a new suite of technologies like ocean carbon removal, we have seen really, really promising early community engagement that, of course, can always be improved upon and built upon, but suggests to me very strongly that we have a good start in this area, that communities are pragmatic and willing to listen, and and companies are willing to listen to them, and that there's potential for getting that social license. And so while I don't think we have universal social license around carbon removal, I do think that, relatively speaking, we have supportive communities in Canada, and that's largely due to the wonderful work that's being done by researchers and innovators and entrepreneurs in Canada right now, and the policymakers that engage on this issue as well. I think we just ultimately have more work to do in this field, and something that we're committed to supporting on.
Une autre question?
Another question? Yes, thank you. I'm not against a new industry and I'm not against new technology, but I do think that if we were to adopt this approach, it's necessary to consult those individuals who are at risk of being impacted the most acutely. And I'm talking about their livelihood and their profession. It's said that this sector could lead to a new billion-dollar economy. But the economies of aquaculture, fisheries, and seafood processing already represents $12 billion in Canada. So it would not be appropriate to support one industry to the detriment of another. Now, in regards to consulting communities, if the most important community, in my opinion, still has not been included, I think that they should be included sooner than later in consultations if you want to have the best chance on your side of succeeding. We don't want to certainly ignore the unions or the groups of fisheries and seafood processors, etc. So that's just a comment rather than a second question, really. But they need to be included very quickly in consultation, in my opinion.
Thank you, Senator. I couldn't agree more. And I think we think a lot about industrial integration of marine carbon removal and carbon removal methods broadly in existing industries to revive those industries or to improve the business case of certain industries, enabling them to decarbonize. There's a lot of opportunities around integrating marine carbon removal within existing industries, and it's an area of research that's worth undertaking in a way that can strengthen the jobs and industries that already exist in many of these communities.
Thank you, Senator Boudreau. Before we go to Senator Gerber, I just want to remind everybody that we have to be completely finished by 8:30. We have 4 senators on our first round and 1 on our second round at the present time. So if I have to, I'll use the powers that King Charles has bestowed on me. So with that, Senator Gerber.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for your presentations. They helped me to understand that there is a major potential in this sector. My question is for both of you and is in regards to costs, which are currently high when it comes to ocean carbon removal, carbon dioxide removal, beg your pardon. Can you speak to me about your opinion on short-term economic viability of these technologies? And, in your opinion, should it be public funds to help these to be rolled out rather than public-private partnerships?
Sure. I'm happy to take it first. Short-term viability. Climate change is a big problem that we're not doing a very good job of solving, which is creating all sorts of market challenges in all of the solutions to the challenge of climate change. So in the short term, I think there's a big opportunity and there's some viability within the voluntary side of the equation. I think as we decide to hopefully collectively take bigger action to avert the worst impacts of climate change that disproportionately affect our ocean ecosystem and all of the fish that live in it, we will see compliance markets stand up and that economic viability, I think, both in terms of the existence of transitioning from voluntary to compliance, as well as the technologies running down their TRL and cost curves. I think those two dovetail hopefully nicely in the future for us all. Yeah, but I do think that the more that the public sector plays a role in learning alongside the private sector at this early stage, the better we'll see in terms of regulators being able to monitor for environmental safety, as well as on the efficacy and quantification side, the rigor of carbon accounting that we all want to see for the climate math to work out.
Thank you, Senator. I would just add to the points that were already made. I think that there are that the public-private partnerships can work in both directions and can support one another. So, for example, currently the private sector through the voluntary carbon market is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in advancing ocean carbon removal, and that's been very catalytic, to date. But by including the public sector through investments, through R&D support, through demonstrations, the public sector can help define what a gold standard for carbon removal looks like and establish regulations that ensure that this is done in a responsible manner as the technology develops and grows and scales. And vice versa, the public sector has shown significant leadership through the development of the procurement program that I mentioned earlier, with their initial $10 million commitment to buy carbon removal credits from Canadian companies. It would be great if the public sector would increase that procurement program in the future. But we also think there's a really important opportunity for Canadian businesses who are also on their own decarbonization pathway to match the ambition of the government and also commit to buying permanent carbon removal so that it has a multiplying effect. Every public dollar can generate 5 or 10 private dollars for buying carbon removal services from Canadian suppliers. And so we think that the public-private arrangement can be really reinforcing, and the public sector and the private sector can complement one another really well.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair.
Merci beaucoup pour vos réponses.
Thank you very much for your answers. Mr. Merchant, I'll stay with you because in your opening remarks, you mentioned a comparison between techniques for eliminating carbon dioxide on land, like planting trees, and ocean-based techniques. Could you please speak further to the advantages of the ocean-based techniques and compare them with the land-based ones?
I would like to know if you can elaborate on the advantage of...
Excuse me, Senator Jorbat, you may not believe it, but I think we're froze. Yeah, just suspend for a second. Well, we're just going to suspend for a second. We get some... Okay, Senator Hoskins. There you go.
I just got a promotion.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you. No.
You're going to end up anywhere here tonight. Would you like to answer while we're waiting to see if we can reconnect?
I think that the scale of the problem means that we're going to need as many solutions that are viable and cost effective. And so, number one. Number two, the ocean represents 70% of the planet. And so it would be, I think, a mistake to discount the opportunity. And the fact that 25% of human-caused emissions are actually naturally going into the ocean every day. That's what's driving ocean acidification. There's these natural processes. It makes sense to look at it. What are the co-benefits? What are the opportunities? And so that's what we're trying to chase down. But I think we're going to need all of the options on the table to meet the challenge.
No, we're not there yet. No, sorry. We're going to go to Senator Dillon and go back to you, Senator Garba. If we get to reconnect, we'll ask Mr. Merchant to answer your question. But in the meantime, we'll go to Senator Dillon.
Thank you. Just trying to make sense of this whole thing. I hear you talk about opportunities, and I also hear you talk about consequences. And Mr. Merchant spoke about carbon capture, carbon removal working in tandem, and one not being able to do it on its own. You spoke about, and he spoke about urgency and companies choosing Canada. We talked about, making it safe, making it effective, and can it be made to scale? So rather than repeat all that has been said, the themes that came to me were opportunity and consequence, a consequence of not acting, and the opportunities that are in front of us that have proven measures. So I suppose the question for a layman and folks that are watching this, and Canadians and British Columbians, where we come from, is that how are you modeling this? How are we presenting this to the common person that every day that passes, and you just said 25% of our pollution is being captured in the oceans. So every day that passes, that we continue to have these conversations, we have DFO here saying we need to do more of this and less of that, and maybe some of this. I guess, how are we presenting this to folks so that they understand that there may come a time, and maybe I'm wrong in my assumption, it doesn't matter how big you scale this, it's not going to work because we've gone too far and we haven't done enough. So my earlier question was, again, when do we move on good and not continue to try to aim for perfect? So are we presenting that risk in a way that is consumable to everyday people?
There might be geographic differences in terms of what is most resonant in Area A versus Area B, and coastal environment, inland environment. I think what I've seen in terms of talking to regular people is that people care about what they think about every day. You know, feeding their kids, paying their bills, and, you know, those types of things. So the more that we can connect to how this helps their day-to-day lives, reducing, you know, extreme risk from climate change. So climate action means hopefully fewer extreme impacts from climate change. The more that we can connect it to what people really care about, I think the better we'll all be. I can't remember who made this point, but there was a point in the previous panel around regulation serving two functions, one around you know, rules safeguarding the environment, but two around social license. And I think that's true. And Senator Boudreau, you also mentioned the need to consult fisheries, existing industries and existing ocean users. I think our ocean users, our ocean-based industries are going to be some of the most impacted from a declining ocean health base as impacts from climate change increase. And so the more that we can engage them directly, understand their concerns, work with them, get the data that they actually want alongside the research happening, the more that we can help folks understand this is not a long-term future problem. The impacts are happening right now, and people are seeing those impacts right now. And just one quick example of how one researcher engaged the fishery industry. You know, the fishing industry often has observers come on their vessels to watch them and hold them accountable. In the United States, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution conducted an offshore research trial this summer, and they invited a fishery observer to join their research and sit on the vessel, watch exactly what was happened, document, and be able to go back and talk to their communities about what they saw, what they learned, which then can be flowed back into the research plans. And so it's all about the people who live and breathe the day-to-day and connecting to what people care about.
Just a quick follow-up. I appreciate that, and you folks are very learned, and you've done a lot of work in this, and sometimes, in my view, we sometimes lose touch with the folks that are going to be impacted by it all, but I'll leave it there. I guess I was asking for something a little bit more tangible, something that we can give folks and have an understanding of this is how urgent this is. I mean, you come to this line, folks, don't bother, because now we're just going to be putting on masks and doing other things, because there's not anything more that we can do. But one bright light that I did hear about that you spoke about was this fast track action committee, and maybe this committee knows about this already. I hadn't heard about it. Is there paper? Is there documentation? Is there work that's been done on that? Any kind of evidence that we can be presented with on that?
Absolutely, I'm happy to follow up with that report.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dillon. Senator Surratt.
I had two parts to my question. The first part you may have answered, and second as well. I just want to clarify. So we talked a little bit about the role of government. It seems to me, and I'm new here as well, that it's a very fragmented approach to all of this, as much on the industry side and your organizations, a number of organizations, as the government side. Is this report that you've just mentioned making reference to that? And if not, what is the plan for a strategic approach as much as on the government side as on the industry side?
I heard what is the role of government and how to manage some of the fragmented silos. I think, agencies are typically, in my experience, they have a mandate, a mission, and that's their focus, and that's because they've been told to do that. And then sometimes there are new ideas that come to the fore that challenge everyone to think new and different and outside of a specific mandate that was previously envisioned. And so how do you move beyond that construct? And one way in the U.S. context was through this Fast Track Action Committee. And in the case of the U.S., right, ocean stakeholders are often very focused on their mandate and mission. Climate and energy stakeholders are very focused on their mandate and mission, and never the two shall talk. However, there's a lot of room for collaboration here. And for example, there was a memorandum of understanding that was signed between the United States Department of Energy and NOAA, which oversees the Fisheries Service in the U.S., to help bridge that and clarify exactly who's doing what and what the coordination collaboration could look like to help give folks direction that this is something that they should be prioritizing, thinking about, and collaborating on.
And then on the government side, obviously there's a number of departments that could be impacted here. Is there any government department specifically that should take the lead on this?
I would defer back to you on that, and maybe Naeem has a perspective.
Go ahead, Mr. Merchant.
I don't have a direct point of view on that, other than I think that a Fast Track Action Committee is an interesting model that we could apply and adapt in a way that makes sense in our system. But yeah, we don't have a specific idea of which department should lead. I think there's a number of different kind of benefits in going one way or another, but nothing to add there.
Senator Schmidt, go ahead.
I think it's short. It's on the investment side, this question here, and I think there's been mention of U.S. investment. You've mentioned investment that you're already making in some projects, yet there doesn't seem to be very much government funding or investment in this. And you mentioned increasing the research funding. And there's carbon credits in here as well. Can you kind of explain a little bit as to where the funding's coming from now? And in the reading I've done, I've seen a lot of figures on increase in GDP and number of jobs and so on, but I've never seen any figures as to what you would expect from government or where we would start with this, and how much, even percentage-wise, we would like to have from each of those sources.
I don't have the number in front of me, but a good source for the scale of recommended investment would be with the National Academies of Sciences. They actually created a table where they costed out what they would recommend in terms of the scale of investment over the next 10 years for advancing the research and development. For context, in the previous administration, or in the previous fiscal year in the United States, there was about a total $60 million U.S. invested from the U.S. government into R&D. I think the annual investment over the 10-year period that National Academies looked at was north of $2 billion, which is about $200 to $300 million per year. I can send you the exact numbers so that you
Please
have
do.
those.
Okay. Senator, Mr. Merchant, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was hoping to just say that I think this is, that question is really germane, because it's exactly why I think we set out and recommend a research roadmap for advancing this sector in Canada, so that we can right-size a research agenda, decide what specific research questions that we in Canada can address directly. How can we be targeted and focused in our research questions? What are the most pressing issues? And then make resource allocation decisions and prioritization decisions based on that. And that can help us, I think, move more quickly and be more focused in answering some of the key questions about this field, and continue us on a path that we are where we can play a leadership role.
Thank you, Senator Schmidt. We're going to Senator Poirier, and then we're going to go back to Senator Gerber. I haven't forgot you, your question. Unless Senator Merchant, do you want to answer Senator Gerber's question from earlier now before we lost contact with you?
If you could repeat the question, I can try. I think I might have missed it.
Senator Gerber, go ahead.
I think he already answered with this because it was about you mentioned that the federal government should establish a roadmap to guide the structural research on topics. And I wanted to know if you can elaborate on that, what this roadmap should look like, and the objective it should aim for.
I can just add to that. I can just add a little bit more specificity that I think a roadmap would help us towards a North Star of how do we safely and effectively and commercially viably scale up carbon removal in Canada. And so it would be focused on questions around the science and biological impacts of marine carbon removal. It would also, make sure that we are advancing something that can be done in a commercially scalable manner, and that it takes into a very significant consideration as a major pillar of this work, building the social license that is necessary and engaging with communities around concerns or opportunities that exist, as well as existing industries where integration of marine carbon removal could benefit those industries. So if we can take a multi-pronged approach here to not just focus on the importance of the kind of not just the science of it, which is absolutely critical and central to this, but also the societal impacts and the economic impacts, then we can land at an outcome where we know how to allocate resources such that we are able to scale a safe, effective, and commercially viable carbon removal industry in Canada.
Thank you, Senator Gerber. Senator Poirier.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for being here. I'm pretty new at this too. I've just my second meeting back into fisheries after many years of being away. So this is, like some of my colleagues, very new, and I'm in a learning process here also. I do want to thank you for all the work that you have been doing on this, not only on the private sector, but from the scientists, the universities that are involved in this and looking into this. But I do share a little bit of concerns, like some of my colleagues have mentioned also. Some of the comments that I'm hearing is that there's a risk to the climate change, that you're seeing the impact already now in the oceans. 75% of the pollution is going into the oceans daily. You are all aware of that. We're talking about ocean-based carbon removal. We've heard the previous witness talk about ocean storage possible for the carbon emission that is collected. I guess it's good that we all know, but on our everyday morning, when the fishermen, whether it be the crab fishers, the lobster fish, I'm on East New Brunswick, right in the fishing industry all the way. I know how easily when people don't understand what's going on, and when there all of a sudden something comes to them, how the reaction can be. And so I think it's extremely important for not only government, but for everybody to be proactive and actually be speaking with them before they find out that something's going on that they don't understand. And they could see this as maybe a possible risk to their lifestyle, to their business, to their own community, to their own life, their own paycheck, their own everything. Being a former member of the Legislative Assembly and Minister of New Brunswick also, I've seen things like this happen. You just have to remember the gas tax, the shell gas issue years ago. So I guess I'm just want to reach really extremely important that you let me know and let other people know, and specifically the people out there, what kind of security do we have by removing this carbon emission out of the removal of the carbon out of the ocean, and the storage. Like, how secure is the storage? If it's not secure, what are the risks to the marine and whatever marine activities are out there? I guess that's where I wanted to know where we're at with this, because I do have a little bit of concerns of the impact. And I'm not saying just the fishermen in my area. I'm also talking the First Nation communities that are the fishermen in my area also. So I'd like just to have some reassurance that we're going to be talking not at the end of all this exercise, but at the very beginning, and if we can find a way to reassure everybody.
Sure. Thank you for your question. I think I heard two big themes. One is around, is it safe for the fish? And two, like, how do folks who are engaging in this research ensure that the people who earn their livelihoods on the water understand that and are engaged far before they're presented with a question around a potential project? I think those are two areas where we have leaned in our grant making. First, on environmental safety, we've funded far before the projects are getting to the water, lab-based research to study the phytoplankton level responses. We're also looking at so the base of the food chain, the first thing. So if you were to see an impact there, then you would expect, additional impacts. The research coming back at that level is extremely promising around the operating levels of the tested regions or the tested feedstocks and safety. So that's very promising. We also heard from Dr. Gurney Smith that we also need to be thinking about what do people really care about, the actual fish. And so going up higher trophic levels is an additional pre-water research level area that is an active area for us. And then second, around this, and that's going to differ area by area, and it's going, in part, is going to have to be informed by constituency-based conversations and input to make sure that the right species are being tested for the specific area. And so I think, to your point, we agree that's got to be a part of that process and engagement with communities. And then second was, how do you actually communicate with folks? And so from my perspective, that means folks who are advancing projects have budget associated with this specific activity, and the capacity required to carry out those activities are hired and acquired at the same level of intensity as your engineer, so that they're given the level of prominence and importance that are required to be successful.
So as far as you're concerned, you don't know if there's any conversations that have had right on the ground with the local fishermen or the unions or fish plants owners or anything like that at this point?
I don't know if there's a specific area that you're referring to, but in terms of the projects that we're involved with, there's extensive engagement happening on the ground. Can there be more? Absolutely, always. I think we're committed to doing more, and I'm aware of a lot of engagement that's happening. But if there's
is that in the Nova Scotia area you're talking?
Absolutely.
Okay, but nothing in New Brunswick that you know of yet.
I'm looking at my colleague Miriam, but. I am not aware of that to date, but I'm happy to follow up and share more if that's helpful.
Yeah. No, it's like I said, I understand what you're seeing, and you're seeing the risk, but I just don't know if the fishermen are seeing the risk, or have they saw a difference in how much they're catching, and is it affecting their catch? How are they seeing the risk of what the carbon's doing and why the importance of the removal? And I think that's the first thing that they need to understand, if there is a risk that this could affect their future lifestyle also and income. Yeah.
I think your point is well taken, and I know one of the other members mentioned the shellfish industry and their movement north, and so I know that there's probably unequal levels of awareness, but more can be done.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Poirier. and Senator Deacon, I sincerely apologize. We will not get the second round, and so hold your thought for some other day. I want to thank Mr. Merchant and Ms. Hawkins and for a very informative session here this evening, and thank our senators. And if I could ask the members of steering to stay around for a few moments afterwards, after our meeting, just to get a check out. Thank you again, and we are adjourned.